The MLB trade deadline is over, and it was pretty crazy. Justin Verlander is back with the Houston Astros. Michael Lorenzen went to the Phillies, and the Marlins traded for hitters. Welcome in to a special edition of Fantasy Baseball today. I am Frank Stampfl, and the whole gang is here, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Let's get right into it. Lots of trades to discuss. The biggest of the day, the Astros acquired Justin Verlander. He is back. At 1 year after winning the AL Cy Young Award. Now, 40 years old. We've talked about him a lot recently. The overall numbers this year, bit of a letdown, I think, based on what we were expecting. But over the last 7 starts, he's been much better. A 149 ERA, a 106 whip, 37 strikeouts over 42 and a third innings during that time. I guess there's a chance he could win more games here with the Astros lineup completely healthy. Obviously, there's familiarity there. Scott, what do you think about Verlander headed back to the Astros? Do you think he's a big jump in value here?
No, I don't think he sees a big jump in value unless they're able to help him recapture some of the stuff he's lost from his 2022 Cy Young winning season. But I'm not counting on that. I mean, 40 years old is 40 years old, and they can't reverse the clock on that, even during this stretch where he's maintained a low ERA, as you pointed out, less than a strikeout per inning. He's not the same guy as last year. He's still a good enough pitcher. He's still somebody who could help the Astros get back to the World Series potentially. And yeah, I think his odds of winning games at a good clip improves with this trade. But I don't think it's going to be magic for Justin Verlander. I think he's clearly a pitcher on the decline. And yeah, now he'll just be declining with a different uniform on.
Fair enough. The Astros, it sounds like Jose Urquidy could be back as soon as this week. I don't think they're going to go with a 6-man rotation. Chris, do you think Jose Urquidy is on the outside looking in? He just goes to the bullpen, or like does JP France kind of lose his job? What do you think happens here with the Astros rotation?
Yeah, like maybe they have some flexibility to give Hunter Brown an extra start off, since he's pushing up on his career high in innings. Has he passed it yet?
No, he was among the 15 pitchers I featured in that article a couple weeks ago who could have innings concerns moving forward, but he was in the lower risk category.
Yeah,
he's actually doing pretty well with innings.
He was at 126 last year, so he's about 15 short of that.
Doesn't mean they won't want to pull back on Hunter Brown, especially since he's had some struggles of late. Or maybe they just go with a 6-man rotation for a while. Or maybe they pull back on Christian Javier. I think that's less likely after the way he bounced back in his last start. But the point is they might want to build in rest for a few of their guys.
Who would you guys rather have between Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander rest of season? Because if you play in AL only, both of those players are going to become available. I don't know if you have the luxury to choose, but let's just say that you did. Who would you guys prefer?
For what it's worth, Scherzer already went through in my AL only league last night. Maybe your waiver wire set up a little differently, so they will both go through at once. But you kind of already had to make that decision in a lot of leagues. I would say I would prefer Scherzer because he's still getting strikeouts at a big rate.
Chris,
I have Verlander one spot higher. I don't feel super confident about that. The weird thing about Verlander this season has been that, like, on a per pitch basis, the whiff rates are pretty similar to last season. And so it's not quite clear why there's been this massive, 30% drop in the strikeout rate for him. So I have held out hope that he would figure something out. He's still doing a really good job of limiting hard contact. So I guess I can see a clearer path to Justin Verlander taking off than for Scherzer, who is still getting strikeouts, but the quality of contact has taken a step back. So I think that's the way I look at it. But, I also wonder if there's just something about the Astros that they can unlock with Verlander, which is an ineffable or slightly less than effable, maybe bit of analysis. But yeah, I feel a little more confident in Verlander.
I think there's a chance too. I would take Scherzer just because the overall swinging strike rate and the whiffs have been better this year. But I do think there's a chance that the Astros can maybe get a little bit more out of Verlander compared to what we've seen here with the New York Mets.
I'm just trying to figure out what effable means because that sounds fraught.
Like how some things are effable and some things aren't. Sorry, I've been watching the Amazon Prime series Good Omens, and they use the word effable and ineffable a lot. I think it's like non-quantifiable, I think is the way I would say.
Okay.
Fair enough. Speaking of those Mets, crazy year, man. Biggest payroll in baseball history. And here we are, the trade deadline. We didn't know if it would actually happen. They traded away Scherzer. They traded away Verlander, Tommy Pham, Mark Canha. We'll talk about Pham a little bit later on. What did they receive in return? 2 outfield prospects from the Astros. In fact, their top prospect in Drew Gilbert, who was a first-round pick last year, 22 years old, hitting .274 with 12 homers and 10 steals in the minors this season. And another outfield prospect, Ryan Clifford, who's 20 years old, actually crushing it this year in the minors. And I did see some takes on the Twitter X that some people think Ryan Clifford might have a higher ceiling than even Drew Gilbert. Scott, what do you think about the return here for Justin Verlander?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Did you see how much money was being sent with him? I was curious to find that out.
I think it's like $35 million for this year and next year. And then half of his 2025 salary if his option vests.
Okay.
It's a significant, I think it could end up being like $55 million.
I mean, to get a caliber of prospect, or I guess 2 pretty good prospects like this, the Mets probably had to do that. Drew Gilbert, by most rank lists, is considered the Astros' best prospect. He was their first-round pick last year. He was tremendous at high A this year, moved up to double A, and the numbers have slowed down quite a bit. But he kind of reminds me of Shane Victorino, a 5'9" guy, just really high energy. The steal total is a little underwhelming, but he runs fast and has pretty good pop for a short guy, and I think could be a starting outfielder for the Mets as soon as next year. I would say among all the prospects that were traded here at the deadline and in the days leading up to the deadline, I would rank Drew Gilbert behind only Kyle Manzardo, who we talked about yesterday.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's slide over to the Phillies, who acquired Michael Lorenzen from the Tigers for infield prospect Hao Yu Lee. And Lorenzen having a great season, 31 years old, 3.58 ERA, 1.1 WHIP on the year, though we are expecting a little bit of regression to hit at some point. This is a pretty big negative park shift going from Comerica to Philadelphia in Citizens Bank Park. And I did see a Phillies beat writer point out that Lorenzen is kind of up against his innings that he threw last year, and there's a chance he could be used as a reliever down the stretch. Chris, your thoughts on Lorenzen being shipped to Philly?
I have not been a believer in Lorenzen all along. I expect significant regression moving forward. I think the park shift won't help in that regard. And I think there's a decent chance we're talking about Lorenzen in a month and people are just dropping him across the board. So if there's a sell window, this would be it for me.
Michael Lorenzen, again, over to the Phillies, and just trying to figure out what happens here with the rest of the rotation, Scott.
Right.
Who gets the boot? Is it Christopher Sanchez? Is it Ranger Suarez?
It's got to be, unless they're planning to go 6-man for a while, or unless, as you suggested, maybe Lorenzen's going to shift to the bullpen.
Maybe play a little outfield.
I feel like if they wanted to, I feel like if they wanted to use the prospect they used to get Lorenzen to acquire a reliever, they could acquire a reliever who's better than Lorenzen. It may not be as simple as that. Like they may want to have him available to start. I don't know. We don't know. Like I would still assume Lorenzen is going to start, at least for now. And that is bad news for Christopher Sanchez, who had become kind of interesting as a fantasy asset, just threw 5 no-hit innings against the Pirates in his latest outing. So that's disappointing. And given that we all, I think, see regression coming for Lorenzen, I'm not so sure they wouldn't just prefer to have Sanchez in that 5th spot for the remainder of the season.
Another starting pitcher trade, Jack Flaherty, was acquired by the Baltimore Orioles in exchange for Cesar Prieto and left-handed pitcher Drew Rom. Rough season here for Jack Flaherty. struggling big time with control, a 4.43 ERA, 1.55 whip on the year. Still gets a decent amount of strikeouts, just under a strikeout per inning for him, but 4.4 walks per nine. The underlying numbers don't really like Jack Flaherty either. And look, by all accounts, this is obviously a big upgrade in terms of just team context. The Cardinals lineup actually has been pretty good this year, but it's a better ballpark out there pitching in Camden Yards now. Scott, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on Jack Flaherty to the Orioles. Is there a chance that a change of scenery can perhaps get Jack Flaherty back on track?
Look, there's always a chance. I think it's difficult to predict that happening for a pitcher. It's easier to say in retrospect, oh, going to this team really fixed him. Because usually they are who we thought they were, even when they do change hands like this. And it's been bad. It's been bad for Jack Flaherty. Obviously he had the amazing season in 2019, fourth in NL Cy Young voting, and then had pitched so little in the 3 years that followed, mostly because of injuries. It was hard to know what to make of him exactly. He's been mostly healthy this year, and it's still gone. It's just been, like I said, it's been bad with few reasons for optimism along the way. I came in, I hopped in here before we started recording, and you guys were talking about whether or not Camden Yards is an upgrade for him. I kind of think he's beyond that at this point. He walks too many guys. He doesn't miss enough bats. And if he doesn't solve both of those problems, I don't think it's going to matter so much where Jack Flaherty's pitching.
I will say, I've joked a few times that I feel like I have like face blindness, like when people like just can't tell people's face. I have that, but for Orioles starting pitchers, like they're just all the same guy to me. Grayson Rodriguez, obviously not, but like everyone else is like 8.5 K per nine, 3 walks per nine, really good results at home, iffy results on the road at times.
I mean, Tyler Wells' walk rate is a lot better than 3 per 9, but I get what you're saying.
2.6, 2.6. Kyle Bradish is the lowest at 2.3. Kyle Gibson is 2.8, 3-ish. Jack Flaherty is not that. His walk rate is much higher than that. I do think this is a significant park upgrade, though. I think the extent to which Camden Yards has become a pitcher's park is not quite appreciated yet. It's an incredibly tough place to hit, especially for right-handed hitters. And I think I'm not expecting Jack Flaherty to be good moving forward. I'm not even sure he's going to be useful for fantasy, but like, I don't think Kyle Bradish and Kyle Gibson and even Tyler Wells, like, I don't really think any of those guys are particularly good. And yet they've all had extended stretches where they've been very useful for fantasy. I could see Jack Flaherty being very useful at Camden Yards. I think on the road, there's probably going to be some blowups, but I do think there's a chance Jack Flaherty is at least a viable, useful streamer moving forward.
Chris, would you rather have Jack Flaherty with the Orioles or Michael Lorenzen with the Phillies?
I don't really want either.
You have to take one.
If you're going to make me take one, I'll probably take Lorenzen, but we might find out in 2 hours or whenever Rob Thompson speaks to the media that they're going to use him as a swingman, in which case it would obviously be Flaherty.
All right. Well, Scott, do you have any takes here on the prospects? I don't think they're big standing here, the ones that the Cardinals received for Jack Flaherty, but Cesar Prieto, 24-year-old infield prospect, and Drew Rom, a 23-year-old left-handed pitching prospect, does have some strikeout upside, but has struggling with the ERA and the whip this year. Any thoughts on those two?
Prieto has had my attention this year. I featured him in the prospects report once. He is, I had his page pulled up and now I closed it. Okay. He's batting between double and triple A, 349 this year. Very low strikeout rate. A guy who has a lot of experience from Cuba and was a great source of batting average there. It's a Luis Arias profile, I would say, which obviously there's a sample of one in terms of Luis Arias caliber players in the majors. So is that profile one you really want to assign to a minor leaguer? Like, is that going to be is that going to lead to a successful outcome at the major league level? Probably not, but I'm sure later this week I'll be writing about the best prospects moved at the deadline, and I'm sure Prito will show up on that list.
All right, let's take our first break, and when we return, we'll get Chris's thoughts on all of the Marlins hitters that they acquired. We'll do that right after this.
And how about this? Get ready for non-stop action that will have you saying, "You gotta be kidding!" Oh my, Canada! This could change things. What a play and what a finish! That's some pretty good football, eh? He's gone all the way to the house. It's the Canadian Football League, Thursday on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back, and let's talk about the Miami Marlins, who were busy acquiring some hitters here on Tuesday. And first up, they traded for Jake Burger in exchange for pitching prospect Jake Eder. And Eder and Burger, that's pretty good. Just thought about that now. Jake Burger will get the chance to, for the most part, he's been playing every day for the White Sox, but now there are no questions. He's going to play every day for the Marlins. They are desperate for power, and that's exactly what he provides. 25 home runs this season, 52 RBI. That also comes with a 214 batting average and a 32% strikeout rate. Chris, I think most people will look at this and they'll say, it's a pretty big downgrade in terms of park. I don't think the park really matters for Jake Burger. I think it's just a good thing he's going to get the opportunity to play every day.
I struggle with that because, when you hit a 200 or a 430-foot home run, it doesn't really matter if it was a short park, a short fence, or a long fence. But, there are still 370-foot home runs to be had. It's a downgrade in park. It's probably pretty neutral in terms of overall environment. But, yeah, on the whole, I think it locks in playing time. He's probably going to play third base moving forward, I would guess, with Gene Segura getting traded. I'm not a full believer in Jake Burger, but the underlying numbers are actually even better than the surface level numbers. The 214 batting average is a 252 expected batting average. The quality of contact is obviously very, very good. Plate discipline's very, very bad. As a Marlins fan, I am sort of guarding against this kind of player just completely flaming out the way Jorge Soler did the first 2 years of his contract. But hey, we've seen Jorge Soler bounce back this season. So maybe Jake Burger can hit 235 with 8 home runs the rest of the way and give them a little boost.
Look, anybody who strikes out as often as Burger does, over 30% of the time is, of course, at risk of flaming out. That's kind of just part of the deal. It's an
inherently volatile profile.
It's an inherently volatile profile, but I don't want to understate the extent of the power potential here for Jake Burger. He's one of only 11 players with 25 or more home runs currently, and the other 10 all have at least 42 more plate appearances than him. So he's been among the players with 25 or more home runs. He has been the most efficient home run hitter so far. Only 2 players in all of baseball have hit a ball harder than him this year, Matt Olson and Giancarlo Stanton. So he is very, very, very top shelf power hitter here, as the home run output shows. And of course the exit velocity, whether you want to, by either measure, he is a top shelf power hitter. And that is the way you overcome a strikeout rate like that. As you pointed out, the expected stats are even better than the actual ones. Expected batting average is 252. I'm surprised it's that high. Actual batting average is 214. And
a big part of it is a lot of his profile looks a lot like Patrick Wisdom, to name one example of a guy who hits the ball really hard and strikes out a lot. The difference is Jake Burger isn't like a fly ball hitter. His line drive rate is 23%. His fly ball rate is 26%. So there is room for the batting average to improve because of that skill set.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good thing. And I think part of the reason I'm encouraged that, or I'm hopeful, I guess, that he won't take a step back is because, well, he's already batting 214. He already has a 279 on base percentage. If all you're expecting from Burger is who he's been so far, then there's a chance you're going to be pleasantly surprised going forward. I think there's a better chance of that than that the rug's going to be pulled out from under him and he's going to become useless. He had been playing every day recently anyway, once the White Sox opened the door to him getting time at second base. So, we'd already gotten kind of used to him in an everyday role, but certainly that continues. now that he's joining the Marlins, who may be the lineup that needs him more than any other team. He's kind of, I feel like Jake Burger is kind of the yin to Luis Arias's yang. Like they are the most extreme versions of polar opposite hitters. And now the Marlins have them both.
Yeah. I've heard, in the past, if you played in auction leagues, right? People saying, well, you can get a Luis Arias and pair him with Joey Gallo, right? And together they're one really good player. And I guess now the Marlins
the Marlins are just adopting that strategy. Yeah,
pretty much. Jake Burger, just to further point out his power this season, 313 ISO, ranks third among all hitters with at least 300 plate appearances this season. And if you look at his exit velocity on fly balls and line drives in particular, 97.4 miles per hour. That's 10th best in all of baseball. One thing I will point out on the negative for him, and this is something that was pointed out to us recently, I think by YouTube comment or Twitter, his home road splits have been much better at home so far in his career. A 271 batting average, 957 OPS at home in Chicago. On the road, 185 batting average, 607 OPS. So,
well, now Miami's home.
Yeah, that's fair. So let's hope that he just continues to mash in his home ballpark, which is now in Miami. The return here, pretty interesting. Jake Eder, 24-year-old left-handed pitching prospect. He was outstanding last season. Was it last season or did he have surgery?
2021.
2021. He was outstanding in Double-A, and then he's taken a step back this year. Might turn out to be a good buy low here for the Chicago White Sox. Scott, I know you were talking extensively about him before we started. Any thoughts on Jake Eder?
Yeah, I got him in the Scott White Dynasty League. I drafted him the year he was out with Tommy John surgery because I feel like prospect evaluators tend to just bury pitching prospects who have Tommy John surgery, even though it's a pretty reliable procedure. It becomes less reliable when you're a less proven pitcher. But to put into context just how, I forget what word you used, Frank, but he was how good he was at Double-A 2 years ago. Jake Eder had a 177 ERA, 0.98 whip, 12.5 K per nine. He was soaring up prospect lists, and then he had the Tommy John. Hasn't been, if you look at the numbers since he came back this year, you're not going to be impressed by him. But his last two starts, 18 strikeouts in 10 2/3 innings. He seems to be trending the right way, and the White Sox have chosen now to buy into him. I think this was the most interesting trade of the day, frankly. Berger's such an interesting player. And like I said, he goes to the lineup that needs him the most. And the Marlins, a team that an organization that normally tries to accumulate prospects, was willing to give up an actual quality prospect in Jake Eder for Jake Burger. So, I guess I'll go back to this for him as well. If I'm ranking all the prospects who were moved at the deadline or in the days leading up to the deadline, Eder would probably come in third for me. I don't think I'm forgetting anybody. Manzardo, Drew Gilbert, and then Jake Eder.
Luis Angel Acuna, would you put him ahead of?
Okay. Yeah, I'd put Acuna. Thanks. Yeah, I'd put Acuna ahead of him. Close call between Acuna and Gilbert, actually. I'm going to have to look closer at that before I actually write that column. But yeah, I would have both ahead of Eder. So fair point.
I do have some disappointing news on the Jake Eder, Jake Burger trade front.
Okay.
I found another Jake for Jake trade, unfortunately. I was hoping this would be the first time that two Jakes were traded for one another, but Jake Diekman was traded along with Cole Hamels for a package that included, among other players, Jake Thompson. So no major league history here. Maybe the first Jake for Jake straight up trade, though. It's a Jake challenge trade.
Let's stick with the Marlins. They also acquired Josh Bell from the Guardians in exchange for Gene Segura and shortstop prospect Khalil Watson. Looks like Burger will play third base for the Marlins, and Josh Bell will be at first. It's been a down year for Josh Bell, batting .233 with 11 home runs, 48 RBI, and a 701 OPS. Still does hit the ball hard, and his expected numbers are still pretty good. It seems like he's been pretty unlucky so far this year, but obviously now does go to a pretty tough park to hit their Lone Depot out in Miami. Chris, your thoughts on the Marlins acquiring Josh Bell? Who would you rather have, Josh Bell or Jake Burger moving forward?
I think I'd rather have Jake Berger than Josh Bell, but Josh Bell, like you mentioned, the underlying stats very, very good for Josh Bell. Not quite as good as they were at the 2021 through 2019 peak, but expected WOBA is 353 compared to an actual 308 WOBA. He's a guy who's underperformed his expected stats throughout his career, but generally not by this much of an extreme. So I do think there's room for Josh Bell to have a big second or last couple of months, I suppose. I don't think it's necessarily like, oh, new ballpark and, better lineup. It is a slightly better lineup, but it would hard to be worse than the Guardians lineup. But I just think if there's natural regression, Josh Bell's probably going to be quite a bit better than he has been so far. And, maybe it's just a case where a change of scenery helps him get it done. I don't feel particularly strongly about that, but I have faith that he will be better moving forward.
Gene Segura, by the way, was released by the Cleveland Guardians, so we'll see if he could potentially latch on with another team as a bench bat or utility hitter, something like that.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing the Guardians are trying to win the AL Central.
Yeah, it's kind of curious moves that they
Yeah,
but
maybe in 2024 they're trying to win it.
One thing that is interesting about this deal is that if Kyle Manzardo gets healthy, they kind of cleared the runway here because they got rid of Josh Bell, something they probably would have had to do in the offseason anyway if they wanted Manzardo to play for them next season. I don't know if we'll see Manzardo this year, but, if they wanted to be aggressive, I guess there's a chance, Scott.
Yeah, probably not. I'm kind of thinking through this for the first time, so forgive my stilted delivery, which is pretty much the norm anyway. But yeah, I think it definitely improves Manzardo's chances of making the opening day roster next year. And given the new draft pick incentives for players who are on the major league roster for their entire rookie season, then maybe they will want to let Manzardo get his feet wet late this year so that it improves his chances of having a high rookie of the year finish next year. It's a little bit of 4D chess, but it's possible.
One really surprising aspect of this trade, I think the Guardians just ate like $10 million with Gene Segura because he's due $8.5 million next year or $6.5 million next year, I think, with a $2 million buyout for 2025. That's a little surprising.
Yeah, I wonder, maybe they're really excited to get their hands here on Khalil Watson, who we'll talk about in just a second. Looking at the Guardians lineup from Tuesday, Oscar Gonzalez seems like he might be a pretty big winner too, because it seems like he'll have the opportunity to be the everyday DH for the Guardians moving forward as well. So I guess that's a name. He popped up and was pretty good in the second half last year for them as well. So we'll see what happens with Oscar Gonzalez. Again, the return here on the Josh Bell trade, Khalil Watson goes from the Marlins to the Cleveland Guardians, and there's been a lot going on with Khalil Watson the past couple of years down in the minors. 20 years old, former first-round pick back in 2020. Is that correct? I wrote 2016. It definitely was not 2016.
2021.
2021. Yeah. So he was the 16th overall pick in that draft. That's what I meant to write down. But the production has been mostly bad. There was some power and speed originally coming into the MLB draft. Lots of strikeouts, lots of character concerns. Scott, I'm guessing here that the Guardians think maybe they can kind of get Khalil Watson's career back on track, because I do think there's upside, but man, there's also been a lot of downside for him too.
Yeah, it's not a bad gamble for a guy who a couple years ago, pretty much every prospect evaluator was excited about. There was a legitimate question. It was the big four shortstops from that 2021 draft class. It was Jordan Lawler, Marcelo Meyer, Brady House, and Khalil Watson. Which of those four was going to be best? And some people were saying, I don't know how many people were saying Watson would be the best, but some of them were putting him ahead of others on that list, let's just say. Yep. And so his first year as a professional was just a total disaster. This year hasn't been much better, but at least the strikeout rate has been much improved. And so
he hasn't gotten suspended this year. So
sure. And so
that's a positive.
I think the Guardians are just buying low, seeing if they can make something out of him, convert that talent into production. And if not, then, no real loss, I guess.
Yeah, and they are an organization, it seems like, that does get the most contact out of their hitters, or at least the ones that have come up throughout their system, right? The Will Brennans, the Stephen Kwans. Maybe that's just their profile, and that's why they're so good at it. But we'll see if they can get Khalil Watson's career back on track as well. The Marlins made one other trade. They acquired Ryan Weathers from the Padres in exchange for Garrett Cooper and Sean Reynolds. Chris, is there a chance that Ryan Weathers starts here because Edward Cabrera was just optioned to AAA?
Yeah, I mean, with that, I think it seems pretty likely that he's going to start. I don't think he's particularly good, but yeah, the Marlins needed some rotation depth, and I think that's all this is.
Mm-hmm. For Garrett Cooper, wondering if he just becomes a short side platoon bat for the Padres now, because they also acquired Ji-Man Choi. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Makes sense. Ji-Man Choi, great against right-handed pitching so far in his career. They can use Garrett Cooper against lefties. Maybe there's something I'm missing here, Scott, but it seems like Garrett Cooper just lost a lot of playing time in San Diego.
Yeah. I mean, he probably would have if he'd stayed in Miami with the acquisition of Josh Bell. So it seemed destined to happen either way. Who had the Padres been playing at DH previously? I guess it was Matt Carpenter and Nelson Cruz, who is now gone. So DH just totally blew up on them.
They were using the catcher, Scott. Sanchez and Campusano at catcher and DH.
Yep. So I would say nobody who we care about is hurt by this.
All right, let's take our final break. When we return, we'll talk about Scott Barlow. He was traded to the Padres and a few other smaller deals. We'll do all of that right after this.
CBS Sports Network goes all in with the World Series of Poker. We're talking a full house of characters in a competition flush with cash. The World Series of Poker on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back, and let's stick with the Padres. They acquired Scott Barlow, who will likely be a setup man for them. Actually, I can guarantee you he will be a setup man for them. He will not be a closer for the Padres. But the bigger news is what happens in Kansas City. Carlos Hernandez likely steps in as the closer there. I mean, this is really low-end closer stuff because the Royals are not going to win many games rest of season. But Scott, who would you rather have between Carlos Hernandez, Gregory Santos, and Brooks Raley? I guess those are all the three closers that have emerged here on bad teams moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, different degrees of bad are those teams, and I would take Raley most of all. I think he is the most likely to. Well, first of all, I think the Mets remain the best team of those, and I think he's the most likely to one of the most likely to just hold on to the role. The problem for Gregory Santos is that there's a good chance Liam Hendricks comes back at some point and gives him the boot. And yeah, I mean, Scott Barlow was having trouble getting saves all year for the Royals. So even if Carlos Hernandez, excuse me, even if Carlos Hernandez is really good, then the same you would figure would hold true for him. His numbers out of the bullpen this year have been not so good that like, oh, wow, this guy needs to be in a closer role for somebody, but good enough that you could see him having a successful stint as a closer. 3.57 ERA, 0.98 whip, 10.7 K per nine, throws very hard. We're somewhat familiar with him in fantasy because he was a decent starter for the Royals a couple years ago. But now he's going to try his hand at closing. One would assume, it is an assumption. He got a save, last week? And
it has been Sunday, I think.
And has been pitching the eighth inning. So it's a reasonable assumption, but the save chances could nonetheless be few and far between.
Go back for 1 second.
Yep.
Pretty significant name we forgot to mention among the Marlins rotation options. Yuri Perez.
Yep.
He's likely to, my guess is he makes one more start. I think that's today or tomorrow. And I would guess his next turn in the rotation is going to be in the Marlins rotation. So probably going to be Yuri Perez as the fifth starter for the Marlins.
Please.
I'd be shocked if he made more than one more start.
Yes, please. Let's get him back in the Marlins rotation. Back to the Padres. They acquired some veterans in Rich Hill and Ji-Man Choi from the Pirates in exchange for left-handed pitcher Jackson Wolf, outfielder Estuar Suero, and Alfonso Rivas. Ji-Man Choi, very strong career numbers against right-handed pitching. I think very, very deep leagues. If you're desperate for a corner infielder, potentially in that lineup, Rich Hill, maybe a streamer at times here. Chris, any interest? Deeper leagues, G-Man Choi and Rich Hill.
No.
No.
I mean,
Fair enough.
they're not moving from the AL to the NL, so even that I can't really say. The joke answer I was going to say is Alfonso Rivas was Carlton in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That guy's name was Alfonso Ribeiro. It's kind of similar. That's all I've got. That is the extent of my thoughts on the Rich Hill G-Man Choi trade.
The AL-NL thing, or were you just saying for people who play in AL and NL only leagues, they might? Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Mm-hmm. I will point out, I think the return, at least in terms of this pitcher, Jackson Wolf, I think it's a pretty nice get for the Pirates. 24-year-old lefty, 4.08 ERA, 109 WHIP in the minors this year, but 10.7 K per nine, 14.5% swinging strike rate. Did make a start earlier this season for the San Diego Padres. We'll see what happens with him, but I thought that was a pretty nice return there for the Pirates. Good job. We don't say that often. The Diamondbacks acquired Tommy Pham from the New York Mets. And Scott, do you think Tommy Pham has a place to play every day, or is he mostly a platoon partner for Alek Thomas? I don't feel too great about the playing time here.
I'm guessing it's the latter. Alek Thomas is such a good defender in center field. Still isn't doing much with the bat, but they might value his defense enough in center to keep him there more days than not. And maybe it's against left-handers where Corbin Carroll shifts over to center to allow Tommy Pham in the lineup. I don't know that it'll be a strict lefty-righty thing, but I do think Pham will not be playing as much as he was with the Mets. And even that had begun to dwindle recently. Pham dealing with a groin injury. Really hasn't played much the last couple of weeks, hasn't hit much the last couple of weeks when he has played. So to whatever degree he was valuable in fantasy, I would say Pham is less so now. But probably worth bringing this up now. The Mets have traded away Pham and Mark Canha over the last week, leaving a big void in left field, which happens to be the position Ronnie Mauricio, shortstop prospect, has been playing most at AAA recently. Now, they have made some roster moves to fill in all the spots that were emptied. They did not call up Ronnie Mauricio. And as you and I were discussing yesterday, Frank, we're at a point now, August 1st, where it might not make sense unless a team is counting on a prospect call-up propelling them into the playoffs. It might not make sense to call them up until the last week of August so that they retain rookie eligibility for next season and could potentially help them secure a draft pick. So that may be what the Mets are thinking by not calling up Ronnie Mauricio yet. But the path is wide open for him now whenever they decide to pull the trigger.
And on that note as well, there was a quote that I saw earlier today from Buck Showalter that said they will prioritize development and playing some of the young kids the rest of the season. And it sounds like Mark Vientos is going to get a fair opportunity starting at DH here on Tuesday night. So he's a name to watch. I don't think you have to add him, but he has performed very well in the minors, big pop as well. So let's see if Mark Vientos can catch fire here with the New York Mets.
Did you guys see the quote from Max Scherzer?
I don't think so.
He basically said that when he talked to the organization, they told him we're looking ahead to 2025 and 2026. That like these moves were it's not a reloading for 2024 situation. That he said that they told him they're probably not going to go after the big free agents this offseason and that they're looking ahead more to 2025, 2026. So that was very interesting.
I mean, it wouldn't make sense for them to trade Verlander if they were thinking about contending next year. Certainly not to eat all the money and trade away Verlander. So I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, okay, are we reloading for 2024? Billy Epler goes, no, we're not. Basically, our vision now is for 2025, 2026, 25 at the earliest, more like 26. We're going to be making trades around that.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it with some of the talent that they acquired and Brett Beatty and Ronnie Mauricio, if they think these kids can turn into anything, but they also have Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso in the prime of their careers. So
Yeah. Well,
Weird.
2024,
apparently they were-
2025, it sounds, or what, 2025, 2026, it sounds like a distant future where there are flying cars and houses on very tall poles and whatever else, robot dogs.
We call them stilts.
It's 2 years from now, so just keep that in mind, Frank. They're only punting on 1 year.
I understand.
But there were reports that they were listening on Pete Alonso, that they didn't outright refuse to trade him because he's a free agent at the end of next season.
I think it's also just especially weird. I mean, given just their circumstance, their owner is Steve Cohen. He comes in with all this money and they're expected to compete and right away. And now they're talking about 2026. I mean, it's a little weird, but we'll see. The Blue Jays, they acquired Paul DeJong earlier in the day. And originally, my mind, I start thinking negatively. I'm like, what's wrong with Bo Bichette? He had the knee injury on Monday, which kind of scary, but turns out he's day-to-day with knee inflammation, so it doesn't sound like it'll be too bad. We'll see what happens, but Paul DeJong also could be a short side platoon partner for Brandon Belt at designated hitter. I think the bigger takeaway here is, do the Cardinals be aggressive in calling up Mason Wynn? Because, Tommy Edman's going to be back, but I think if they wanted to call up Mason Wynn, they could. And he is crushing it in the month of July, hitting .359, 8 home runs, 1177 OPS down in the minors. One of the top prospects in the game. Scott, I just don't know if there's enough incentive for the Cardinals to, I guess, start that clock with someone like Mason Wynn.
Late August, there will be.
Yeah.
There was another, Brendan Donovan is out for the season.
Yep.
That was another thing that came out today.
Yep. No, I do think we'll see Wynn before the year's done. I just don't know that there's much incentive to call him up today.
All
and
right.
he is a really interesting prospect. Doesn't have like a huge power ceiling, but let's see. I'm trying to think.
Been hitting for power lately.
Yeah, I mean he has power, but it's I don't see Mason Wynn turning in. I don't know, maybe like a Randy Arozarena caliber hitter is what he could be, but he's a shortstop, obviously, and former pitcher. He actually was only pitched 1 inning, but there were some thoughts of making him a 2-way player when he was first drafted. He has a gun at shortstop.
Ellie De La Cruz's standing as the hardest throwing infielder will last as long as Mason Wynn stays in the minors.
Yeah,
because he has been clocked at over 100 miles an hour on infield throws, I'm pretty sure. I think last year in the Futures game.
Defensively, he was ready on opening day. Defensively, it's just how quickly would the bat come along here for Mason Wynn, but he's hitting well. The batting average is up, power, speed. He looks like a very promising player for the Cardinals in the future. We should see Mason Wynn at some point later on this season. A few smaller trades. The Red Sox acquired Luis Arias from the Brewers, and Chris, you and I have long been the Luis Arias stands here on this podcast. Do you think he gets a chance to maybe play up the middle with Trevor Story?
I don't know if he's going to play. I kind of think it's an interesting landing spot, though, because he's got that pull heavy swing that, has led to, when things have gone well, a little bit of power to the pull side. That obviously could work out pretty well with the green monster out there. So it'll be interesting to see. I'll keep an eye on it. Is he healthy right now?
I think he was just sent to the minors because he was playing so poorly. So that's the last that I've heard on Luis Arias. The Dodgers acquired Ryan Yarbrough from the Royals, and my guess is that he'll come out of the bullpen, and he does offer some starting pitcher depth if they need it. But as of now, the Dodgers have Tony Gonsolin, Julio Arias, Bobby Miller, Lance Lynn, Clayton Kershaw could be back soon. They still have Emmett Sheehan. They have Michael Grove. So, and they're talking about Walker Buehler. He could be back by the end of the season as well. So it seems like Ryan Yarbrough, more of a long reliever than anything else for the Dodgers. The Rangers acquired Austin Hedges from the Pirates, some catcher depth with Jonah Heim recently going down with injury. Phillies acquired Rodolfo Castro in exchange for Bailey Falter. And then just some much smaller trades. The White Sox acquired Luis Patino for cash.
That is worth commenting on because he was a huge pitching prospect, Luis Patino, a couple years ago. What trade was he a part of? Was he part of the Jake Cronenworth, Tommy Pham trade? Was that it? He was the biggest piece going back to the Rays in a pretty significant trade with the Padres was Luis Patino. And just
sounds
last
right.
year in a dynasty league, I fought hard to acquire him in a trade and was rebuffed because that's how highly regarded he was in an arm. And now the Rays
He was
are
the Blake
trading
Snell
him-
trade.
Yeah.
The Blake Snell trade. Okay. And now the Rays are trading him for cash. That is a precipitous fall for a
He's been really bad.
he has, but that's still
Yeah, 7.5K per nine, 5.8 walks per nine at AAA this year.
so reclamation projects here for the White Sox. I mean, I suppose there's a chance he could pitch for some down the stretch this year, given that their rotation's pretty depleted. We'll see.
Yep, we'll see there with Luis Patino. Yankees acquired reliever Keenan Middleton. The Braves acquired Brad Hand. The Brewers acquired Andrew Chafin. The Rays traded for Adrian Sampson and Manuel Rodriguez from the Chicago Cubs. And to Nando DeFino's delight, his ears must be ringing somewhere, the Yankees acquired Spencer Howard, someone I know Nando has loved forever.
Another reclamation project.
Yeah, let's a quick mention on what could have been. Apparently, the Dodgers and Tigers had a deal in place for Eduardo Rodriguez, but Erod actually invoked his no trade clause, which killed the deal. Very interesting that he wouldn't want to go from a team like the Tigers to the Dodgers. But that will be an interesting story to follow and see if any details come out because
it sounds like he just doesn't want to move to the West Coast.
Oh,
It sounds like it was as simple as that.
fair enough. You know what? I don't want to move to the West Coast either. So I guess I see where he's coming from. No offense to the West Coasters out there. Multiple teams were in on Dylan Cease right up to the deadline, but nothing happened there. The Pirates held on to David Bednar and Mitch Keller for now, see if they do anything in the offseason. And the Mets did not trade away Adam Ottavino or Brooks Raley. So again, it looks like those guys will be first up in terms of saves for the New York Mets. Let's wrap up with some winners and losers here from this trade deadline. And Chris, we'll start off with you. Who do you have as a winner?
Andres Munoz feels like an obvious one. I know he wasn't actually traded, but with Paul Sewald gone in Seattle, he seems likely to be a high-end fantasy closer for the rest of the season. I'll say Jeimer Candelario, just an upgraded lineup, probably a slight upgrade in park. The other one that I'm going to go with Jack Flaherty. I'm going to say Jack Flaherty is a winner. I really do think Camden Yards could make him go from someone who I really didn't have very much interest in at all in fantasy to someone who I think we will be talking about a decent amount the rest of the way.
All right, Scott, I have a feeling Chris might have stole one of your answers. Or
Well, yeah, I mean, I co-signed to Munoz being the biggest winner at the deadline. I said yesterday when the trade happened that I thought that would be the case. And pleasantly surprised at my prediction that it would be a relatively quiet deadline day, given that the trades the trades were kind of more spread out over the course of the week this year rather than all happening at the last minute. So, that proved to be true. Okay, biggest winners apart from Munoz, I'm going to say Lance Lynn getting a second chance a chance to turn his career around with an organization that generally doesn't miss with its acquisitions in the Dodgers. I'm going to say Jordan Montgomery landing in an organization that gives him a lot more win potential. And let's go with, I'm going to think this through a little more. I'm actually going to write about a column. I'm going to write a column about it after we get off. But just going top of mind here. I had a third one. Now I can't remember it. It was Ronnie Mauricio. Even though he's not coming up today, I would call him a winner at the deadline since left field is open up for him.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off that one as well. And I think this might be more so from a dynasty perspective, but Kyle Manzardo,
yeah.
I think he's a winner with all of this going down. Yeah. They traded away Josh Bell. There's a clear runway now. It's, Kyle Manzardo and Josh Naylor as the first base and the DH of the future for the Cleveland Guardians. He still does have some things to figure out in terms of the splits. He's been really bad against left-handed pitching in the minors, but if he can improve at all, I think that the Guardians are going to give him an opportunity to be an everyday player as soon as opening day next season. So I think a big winner here is Kyle Manzardo. Let's slide over to the losers. Scott, we'll start with you this time. Anyone very clearly losing value in fantasy baseball?
I feel like CJ Cron's the biggest loser. He gets to keep playing for now. I'm not sure that's going to last. And even if it does last, pre-Coors Field, CJ Cron was no great shakes in fantasy. And so I believe that's going to remain. He's going to revert to that. Other big losers. I don't know. You got anybody?
I'll give you an assist here, Scott. He has the same name as you. Scott Barlow.
Scott Barlow. Yep, that's an obvious one. No longer getting saves. I was trying to. That's actually along the lines I was thinking. Who loses save chances?
Yeah, like I almost thought like David Montgomery as a winner. Just sorry, I completely blanked. David Robertson.
David Montgomery. Yeah. He's going to be great for the Lions this year.
Yeah, that's sorry. I'm writing about the running back depth charts, but like David Robertson going from a team that, as it turns out, was selling hard to a team that was buying. That's obviously, I think, a winner.
Yeah, and so that would make AJ Puck a loser. Tanner Scott, if you had picked him as a possible replacement, since Puck was struggling.
Yeah.
Randall Grichuk, like CJ Cron, I would have to consider a loser. And then all the Diamondbacks.
Yeah,
closer candidates led by Scott McGuff and Kevin Ginkel. I would have to call them losers. I think those are the clearest ones.
Chris, any additions here?
I've got one that's a little off the wall, but just kind of trying to read the tea leaves here. Maybe Jonah Heim. Maybe the decision to trade for Austin Hedges. I know Austin Hedges, that's one of maybe the worst hitter in baseball among like players who actually try to hit now. But maybe that acquisition suggests a little concern about his ability to come back from that wrist injury.
I just remembered too that I wanted to bring up. Jonathan Aranda, loser. Michael Busch, loser. A couple 25-year-olds have absolutely nothing more to prove in the minors. They are dominating down there, and they just can't find openings with the big club. And I hoped they would be dangled as trade bait. Maybe Busch was part of a hypothetical Eduardo Rodriguez deal. We'll never know. But they remain with their present organizations, which means they remain in purgatory. And that's frustrating because they both look like they could.
Really, any prospect who gets traded away from the Rays, I know they're a very smart organization that tends to get the most out of their guys, but like any guy getting traded from the Rays, I'm going to view as a winner just because the Guardians are much less likely. One, the Rays are just incredibly patient with their hitters, with their prospects in general. And they're always willing to use guys in platoon roles. Oh man, I'm blanking on the name now. The guy they just traded to the Guardians.
Kyle Manzardo.
God, I just saw somebody tweet Angel Bastardo's name and just completely, they're so similar that I just completely blanked. He's going to play every day next year. He may not be good every day. He may struggle against lefties, but like the Rays, there is a really good chance that he gets called up by the Rays next season and is just a platoon player. That's just how they operate. They're fully willing to potentially sacrifice long-term development for short-term gains. And
we're totally on the same wavelength with that. I was actually saying last night because I traded Kyle Manzardo away in the Scott White Dynasty League this year. And if I had known he was going to be in with a different organization before he got called up to the big leagues, I might not have done that because with the Rays, you have to assume they're going to
they're looking for any possible edge they can get in terms of winning games right now. And that's smart. They're really good at that, but it's you look at Joshua Lowe, who has been really good, but has been hampered by the fact that he doesn't play every day.
Yep. Well, that's it. The opening day is opening day. The trade deadline, we're all over the place. Let's get it together before we come back here later on. Let's, meditate and kind of think about what we're doing here. But the trade deadline is in the books. The big news of the day, Justin Verlander sent back to the Houston Astros, Michael Lorenzen to the Phillies, Jack Flaherty to the Orioles, and the Marlins trading for a bunch of hitters, Jake Berger and Josh Bell. We're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back again a little bit later on. Bye-bye.